What happens when a police officer drunk on his own small-town power pulls over the wrong person? We're not talking about a mayor's cousin or a lawyer with connections. We're talking about a woman whose entire career is built on dismantling men just like him, brick by corrupt brick. In the quiet town of Maplewood, South Carolina, a routine traffic stop spirals into a masterclass in humiliation and abuse. But Officer Mike Donovan had no idea that the woman he was trying to break was an expert at breaking others, and he had just triggered an investigation that would tear his world and his town's dark secrets wide open. Maplewood, South Carolina, was the kind of town you see on postcards. Ancient oak trees, draped in Spanish moss, formed canopies over streets lined with pristine antebellum homes. The town square boasted a gazebo, a Confederate soldier memorial polished to a gleam, and a bakery called Sweet Peach Pies, run by a woman named Betty, whose pies were the stuff of local legend. It was a town that prided itself on community tradition and the unshakable authority of its police department. Officer Mike Donovan was a product of this environment. A big man with a face that seemed permanently flushed and a swagger perfected over years of patrolling the same small stretch of roads. He was the embodiment of Maplewood's authority. To the town's influential families, he was a protector. To outsiders and to the handful of minority families who lived on the less manicured side of the railway tracks, he was a predator in a neatly pressed uniform. On a sweltering afternoon, Dr. Denise Carter was driving a nondescript 10-year-old Toyota Camry through the heart of Maplewood. She was new to the area, renting a small cottage just outside town limits under the guise of being a visiting professor at a nearby college. Researching Southern societal structures, Denise was a tall, elegant black woman in her 30s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Her hair was pulled back in a professional bun, and she wore a simple but well-tailored linen pantsuit, an outfit that was both practical for the South Carolina heat and completely at odds with the dusty, unassuming car she drove. She signaled her turn onto Main Street, coming to a full stop at the four-way intersection. She checked both ways before proceeding. In her rearview mirror, she saw the flash of blue and red lights. A sharp, piercing siren blared once, an unnecessarily aggressive sound in the sleepy afternoon. Denise's heart didn't race. Her breath didn't catch. Instead, a profound and weary sense of calm washed over her. She was a behavioral analyst with the FBI's elite behavioral analysis unit, undercover on a long-term operation, investigating systemic corruption in rural law enforcement agencies across 3 states. Maplewood was her latest focus. She had been observing, documenting, and building a case. She knew who Mike Donovan was. She had read his file, a document thick with civilian complaints that had all been dismissed as unfounded by his close friend, Police Chief Ron Harper. She pulled the Camry to the curb, placing her hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. She watched Donovan in her mirror as he took his time getting out of his cruiser. He adjusted his belt, hitched up his pants, and sauntered toward her car, his hand resting casually on the butt of his Glock. He was performing, and Denise was his unwilling audience. He didn't go to her window. Instead, he stopped at her rear passenger door, forcing her to crane her neck uncomfortably to see him. It was a classic power move designed to disorient and establish dominance from the outset. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a lazy drawl that dripped with condescension. "You in a hurry today?" "No, officer," Denise replied, her voice steady and clear. "I was not." He smirked, a slow, unpleasant curl of his lip. "Funny, because from where I was sitting, you rolled right through that stop sign back there like it was a suggestion. License and registration." Denise knew she hadn't. Her car's built-in dash cam, a tiny, discreet device that fed directly to a secure cloud server, would prove it. But this wasn't about the stop sign. It was about her. A black woman in a linen suit driving through his town. She reached slowly for the glove compartment, retrieved the registration and her proof of insurance, and then took her wallet from her purse. She handed him her driver's license, which listed her cover name, Dr. Rachel Bennett, and her local rental address. Donovan took the documents, barely glancing at them. His eyes were fixed on her. Dr. Rachel Bennett, he read aloud, drawing out the syllables. Doctor of what? Basket weaving? His partner, a younger, less confident officer named Harris, chuckled nervously from the passenger side of the patrol car. Psychology, Denise said, her expression unreadable. A psychologist, Donovan mused, tapping her license against his thumbnail. Analyzing folks, are you? Well, you can analyze this. Your registration shows this car is registered to a holding company up in Virginia. That's a little strange, don't you think? It's a long-term lease, Denise stated simply. Uh-huh. He leaned in closer, invading her personal space, his breath smelling of stale coffee and chewing tobacco. You got anything in this car I should know about? Any weapons, narcotics, anything illegal? No, officer, I do not. You mind if I take a look? He asked, though it wasn't a question. It was a command wrapped in the thinnest veil of politeness. I do mind, Denise said firmly, her eyes meeting his. You have no probable cause to search my vehicle. Donovan's smirk vanished, replaced by a cold hardness. The mask had slipped. Ma'am, your mismatched story. The out-of-state corporate vehicle. You're giving me plenty of cause. Your attitude isn't helping either. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time. Step out of the car. Denise's mind was racing. This was a critical juncture. She could reveal herself now and end this fast. But doing so would compromise her entire operation. The investigation into Chief Harper and the illicit activities of his department was far bigger than this one Neanderthal cop. She had to play this out, collect the data. She was no longer just the investigator. She was now the evidence. With a deep, controlled breath, she unbuckled her seatbelt. As you wish, officer. As she stepped out of the car, her movements fluid and deliberate. Donovan's eyes swept over her, a crude and demeaning appraisal. Turn around. Hands on the roof of the car, he barked. The heat of the metal roof seeped through the thin fabric of her sleeves. The humiliation was a physical thing, a burning sensation on her skin. She could feel the eyes of the few passers-by on the street. She heard the click of a phone camera from an upstairs window. Good witnesses. What exactly am I being detained for, Officer Donovan? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. He let out a short, sharp laugh. Right now, contempt of cop. We'll find the rest as we go. People like you always have something to hide. He kicked her feet farther apart, his boot making contact with her heel, and began his pat-down. It was rough, unprofessional, and lingered far too long. Denise stared straight ahead at her own reflection in the car window, her face a mask of stone. Inside, she was a coiled spring of fury. Every degrading touch, every condescending word meticulously filed away. He didn't know it yet, but Officer Mike Donovan was no longer writing a ticket. He was writing his own indictment. As Donovan finished the invasive pat-down, he stepped back with a theatrical sigh of disappointment, as if genuinely surprised he hadn't found a weapon. All right, stay right there. Don't so much as breathe wrong, he ordered before turning his attention to her car. His partner, Officer Harris, finally emerged from the cruiser. He was younger, maybe in his mid-20s, with a nervous energy that suggested he was more follower than leader. He avoided Denise's gaze, focusing on directing the sparse traffic around the scene. He was complicit in his silence. You're going to want to watch this, Harris, Donovan called out. his voice booming with performative authority. "This is how you handle someone who thinks they're above the law." He opened the driver's side door and began to rummage through the vehicle. It wasn't a search, it was a violation. He tossed her research papers onto the floor, flipped through a copy of Carl Jung's Man and His Symbols with Greasy Fingers, and dumped the contents of her glove compartment onto the passenger seat. Denise remained perfectly still, her hands flat on the hot roof. Her training had prepared her for high-stress interrogations and facing down hardened criminals. But this was different. This was a raw, personal abuse of power predicated on nothing more than the color of her skin and her refusal to bow to his fragile ego. She kept her breathing steady, her mind a cold, analytical engine. She was documenting every violation, the lack of probable cause for the search, the failure to read her Miranda rights before what was clearly becoming a custodial interrogation, the public humiliation. Donovan moved to the back seat. Tucked away on the floor was a standard-issue government-grade black briefcase. It was locked with a combination keypad. His eyes lit up. He'd found his prize. He pulled the briefcase out and slammed it onto the trunk of the Camry with a loud thud. "Well, well, well, what do we have here, Dr. Bennett?" he crowed. "Looks a little too important for a psychologist." "That is my personal property, officer," Denise said, her voice cutting through the humid air. "You are not authorized to open it." "I am authorized to do whatever I need to do to ensure officer safety," he retorted, spouting a line he'd clearly used 100 times before. "For all I know, this thing is full of drug money. Or a bois." "What's the combination?" "I am not providing it," she said flatly. Donovan's face contorted with rage. He was used to immediate compliance or fear. Denise's calm defiance was like gasoline on his fire. He turned to Harris. "Get the crowbar from the trunk." Harris hesitated. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "Mike, maybe we should just call it in for a search warrant." "A warrant?" Donovan spat, his voice low and menacing. "I am the law in this town. You understand me? I don't need a permission slip from some judge to do my job. Now get the damn crowbar." Harris, his face pale, scurried back to the cruiser. This was the tipping point. The destruction of government property was a federal offense. More importantly, the contents of that briefcase were classified. If Donovan opened it, he wouldn't just be violating her civil rights. He'd be committing a felony and compromising a multi-state federal investigation. The operation, everything she had worked on for months, was at stake. She took a slow, deliberate breath and straightened up, turning away from the car to face him directly. Her movement was so sudden and self-possessed that it startled him. "Officer Donovan," she said, and the tone of her voice had changed. The submissive victim was gone. In her place was a woman of absolute command. "I am going to give you one final opportunity to cease this illegal search, return to your vehicle, and wait for your supervisor, Chief Harper, to arrive." Donovan was momentarily taken aback by her shift in demeanor. Then he laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You think you can give me orders? You think calling for Ron is going to save you? Honey, Ron and I go way back. He's going to laugh when I tell him about this." "I'm sure he will," Denise said, her eyes like chips of ice. "However, you are currently in the process of violating multiple federal statutes. Specifically, I would refer you to Title 18, Section 242 of the U.S. Code, deprivation of rights under color of law. That's a felony, officer. Prying open that briefcase would add destruction of federal property and obstruction of justice to the list." Donovan's bravado faltered. He knew the words, but he'd never had them thrown in his face with such clinical precision. "You've been watching too much TV, lady." Have I? Denise took a step forward. My name is not Rachel Bennett. My name is Dr. Denise Carter. I am a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She reached into her jacket, a movement so swift and sure he didn't have time to react, and produced a small leather case. She flipped it open. Inside, pristine and gleaming, were her credentials and her FBI badge. The world seemed to stop. The chirping of cicadas in the oak trees suddenly sounded deafening. Harris, who was walking back with a crowbar in his hand, froze mid-stride, his jaw slack. Donovan stared at the badge, then at her face, then back at the badge. His ruddy complexion drained away, leaving a pasty, sickly white. The smirk, the swagger, the dominance, it all evaporated like mist in the morning sun. He was looking at a ghost. That's a fake, he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. It was a desperate, flailing attempt to reclaim control of a reality that was rapidly slipping from his grasp. Denise didn't even blink. My credentials are real, officer, and you have just made the single biggest mistake of your career. You have detained and illegally searched a federal agent in the performance of her duties. You have attempted to destroy federal property, and in doing so, you have made yourself the primary subject of a federal investigation. She raised her voice slightly so the still frozen Harris could hear clearly. Officer Harris, I advise you to put down that crowbar and secure your partner's service weapon right now. Harris looked from Denise's unyielding face to Donovan's crumbling one. He dropped the crowbar as if it were red hot. It clanged loudly on the asphalt, the sound echoing the shattering of Mike Donovan's world. The hunter had just realized he wasn't just caught in a trap. He had walked into the den of the lioness. The silence that followed Denise's declaration was thick and heavy. Officer Donovan stared at her badge, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. The woman he had been systematically humiliating was not some helpless civilian. She was a figure of immense and untouchable authority. His entire body seemed to deflate, the bluster and aggression draining out of him, leaving behind a hollowed-out man trembling in a police uniform. No, you're lying, he whispered, the words lacking any conviction. Special Agent Carter, FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit. Move. She stated, her voice cold and devoid of emotion. My badge number is 7824B. My direct superior is Assistant Director Robert Ellis at the Columbia Field Office. I suggest you get on your radio and request your Chief of Police, Ron Harper, to meet me at this location immediately. You will also contact your dispatcher and have them notify the FBI's Columbia duty agent of this situation. You will inform them that you are detaining a federal agent. Do it now. Each sentence was a hammer blow, precise and devastating. She wasn't asking. She was issuing orders. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been inverted with breathtaking speed. Officer Harris, seeing the utter panic in his partner's eyes, finally acted. He cautiously approached Donovan. Mike, just do what she says. Donovan flinched as if struck. He looked at Harris, then back at Denise. His mind was a frantic mess, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. He had built his career on intimidation, on the certainty that his badge and the town's good old boy network made him invincible. That invincibility had just been exposed as a fragile illusion. He stumbled back to his cruiser, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. He fumbled with the radio, his hands shaking so violently he could barely press the button. Dispatch, this is 1 Adam 12, he croaked, his voice cracking. I need Chief Harper at my location. Main and Pine. It's urgent. There was a pause. Then the dispatcher's tiny voice came back. 10-4. 1 Adam 12. Is everything all right? Donovan looked at Denise. who was watching him with an unnerving stillness. Just get him here." He couldn't bring himself to say the rest. He couldn't admit over the open airwaves that he had just detained an FBI agent. Denise took out her own phone. With a few quick taps, she sent a coded text message. "Exposure. Hostile LEO contact, Maplewood. PD, request immediate field office liaison." A reply came back almost instantly. "Acknowledged. Liaison en route. Sit tight." She slipped the phone back into her pocket. "Officer Donovan, you failed to inform the dispatcher of the full situation. That is another mistake in a rapidly growing list. Hand me your radio." He looked at the radio in his hand as if it were a foreign object, then handed it over to her without protest. Denise keyed the mic. Her voice was now the official, no-nonsense tone of federal law enforcement. "Maplewood Dispatch, this is Special Agent Carter of the FBI. I am on scene at Main and Pine with your officers Donovan and Harris. There has been an incident. I have instructed Officer Donovan to have Chief Harper respond to this location. I am also officially requesting that you notify the FBI Columbia Field Office duty agent that officers of the Maplewood PD have conducted an illegal stop and search on a federal agent. Acknowledge." The radio was silent for several seconds. The dispatcher was likely in shock. Finally, a shaky voice responded, 10-4, FBI. We are making that notification now." Denise handed the radio back to a dumbfounded Donovan. The game was over. The official record had been made. There was no sweeping this under the rug. There would be no phone call between Donovan and Chief Harper to fix this. It was out of their hands now and in the far more formidable grip of the U.S. Department of Justice. Soon after, a black SUV with official town plates screeched to a halt behind the patrol car. A heavy-set man in his late 50s, his face a mask of anxious fury, climbed out. Chief Ron Harper was a man accustomed to being in control, and the garbled information he'd received had clearly thrown him. "Mike, what in the hell is going on here?" Harper boomed, his eyes scanning the scene, his two officers looking terrified, and a black woman standing calmly beside her car. He immediately assumed she was the problem. "Ma'am, I don't know what you said to my officers." He stopped mid-sentence as Denise held up her badge. "Chief Harper," she said, her voice cutting him off. "I am Special Agent Denise Carter. Your officer, Mike Donovan, initiated a baseless traffic stop, conducted an illegal search of my person and vehicle, and attempted to forcibly open a case containing classified federal documents. He did all of this after I identified myself as a doctor and provided valid credentials." Harper's face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally a desperate attempt at damage control. "Agent Carter," he said, forcing a placating smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I am sure this is all a terrible misunderstanding. Mike here is a very thorough officer. I'm sure he had his reasons. His reasons, Chief, were that I was a black woman driving a car he didn't think I belonged in a town he believes he owns." Denise replied, her gaze unwavering. "His thoroughness constituted multiple civil rights violations, and your immediate attempt to excuse his behavior tells me everything I need to know about the culture you foster in this department." Harper's pathetic smile faltered. He was used to smoothing things over, making complaints disappear, but he was out of his depth. He was facing a system far more powerful than his own. Just then, two unmarked black sedans, a Ford Explorer and a Chevrolet Tahoe, turned onto Main Street, their movements sleek and purposeful. They pulled up, boxing in the police cruiser. 4 men in dark suits, all with the same grimly professional look, stepped out. The lead agent, a tall man with graying temples, strode directly toward Denise. "Agent Carter," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. Special Agent in Charge, Paul Whitaker, Columbia office. Are you all right? I'm fine, Paul, she replied. But we have a situation here. Whitaker turned his steely gaze from Denise to Chief Harper and Officer Donovan. It was a look that could freeze fire. Chief Harper, I'm Paul Whitaker. It seems your officers have made a grave error. My agents will be securing the scene. I expect your full and immediate cooperation. Your officers, Donovan and Harris, are to be placed on administrative leave effective immediately. Their firearms, badges, and vehicles are to be surrendered to my team pending a full federal investigation by the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Chief Harper looked like he had been punched in the gut. Donovan simply stared into the middle distance. A broken man. The karma wasn't just coming. It had arrived with a federal motorcade. The little kingdom of Maplewood was about to be dismantled, and the king and his knight had just handed the FBI the keys. The arrival of Special Agent in Charge Paul Whitaker and his team transformed the quiet street corner into a federal crime scene. The atmosphere shifted from tense to clinical. Whitaker's agents moved with an unnerving efficiency that made the local police force look like amateurs. One agent began taking high-resolution photographs of the scene. Denise's car, the scattered papers, the crowbar lying on the asphalt. Another approached Officer Harris, separating him from Donovan and quietly informing him that he would need to provide a formal statement. Harris, seeing a potential lifeline, began talking almost immediately, his words tumbling out in a rush of panicked self-preservation. I told him, sir, I told him to wait, to maybe get a warrant. I didn't. The agent simply held up a hand. Save it for your official deposition, officer. Right now, just give me your badge and your service weapon. Chief Harper watched, impotent, as his authority was systematically stripped away on his own turf. He tried to intercede one last time. Now hold on, Whitaker. Placing my officers on leave is a departmental matter. You can't just come in here and... I can and I am, Whitaker cut in, his voice leaving no room for argument. This is now a federal matter. Your department is under investigation for civil rights violations. If you obstruct my agents in any way, I will personally see to it that you are charged with obstruction of justice. Do you understand me, Chief? Harper's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He was defeated. He gave a short, sharp nod. Whitaker then turned to the shell-shocked Mike Donovan. Officer Donovan, you are the subject of a federal civil rights investigation. You are not under arrest at this time, but you will be required to surrender your weapon and badge. You are to have no contact with Officer Harris, Chief Harper, or any other member of the Maplewood Police Department regarding this incident. A federal prosecutor from the DOJ will be in contact with you. I strongly advise you to retain legal counsel. Donovan, his face ashen, unbuckled his duty belt and handed it over. The act was one of utter surrender. The tools of his power and identity were gone. He was no longer Officer Donovan, the feared lawman of Maplewood. He was Mike Donovan, a civilian in a costume facing the full weight of the federal government. While his team secured the scene, Whitaker walked with Denise to the side. Your cover's blown, obviously, he said in a low voice. The broader corruption case just got a whole lot bigger. Paul, Denise replied, her composure returning as she shifted back into her professional role. This wasn't just a random act of a lone racist cop. Donovan felt untouchable. He invoked Harper's name as a shield. He assumed his chief would back his play no matter how egregious. This stop, this abuse, it's not an anomaly. It's the standard operating procedure. This is the rot we came here to find. Whitaker nodded grimly. My thoughts exactly. Donovan just handed us the probable cause we needed on a silver platter. We were building a case based on financial irregularities and informant tips. Now we have a direct first-hand account of a civil rights violation by a uniformed officer enabled by his chief. This is the linchpin. Denise's mind was already connecting the dots, her analytical brain processing the new variables. The original investigation had been focused on a kickback scheme involving traffic citations and a private towing company owned by the mayor's brother-in-law, with hints of civil forfeiture abuse. It was a solid white-collar crime case. But what Donovan had done was different. It was raw, ugly, and visceral. And it was the kind of case that got the public's attention and gave prosecutors the leverage they needed to crack an entire organization open. Pull every complaint ever filed against Donovan, Denise instructed Whitaker. I want to re-interview every single person who was dismissed by internal affairs. Pull the department's training records, their use of force reports, their vehicle's stop data broken down by race. This isn't just about Donovan anymore. It's about a pattern and practice of unconstitutional policing. We're going to put the entire Maplewood Police Department under a microscope. We're already on it, Whitaker confirmed. A team from Columbia is on its way with subpoenas for every file in Harper's office. He's not going to know what hit him. As the federal agents worked, word began to spread through the small town. People emerged from their homes and shops, their phones held up to record the unprecedented scene. The sight of the formidable Officer Donovan being disarmed, and the blustering Chief Harper being silenced by men in suits was a seismic event in Maplewood. The carefully maintained veneer of orderly small-town life was cracking wide open, revealing the ugliness beneath. A woman, Mrs. Betty Lawson, who owned the bakery, approached one of Whitaker's agents. "Is it true?" she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "What they're saying? That Officer Donovan is in trouble." The agent gave a non-committal response, but the hope in the woman's eyes was unmistakable. Later that evening, Denise sat in a temporary command post the FBI had set up in a neighboring county. The initial reports were already flooding in. The simple act of federal intervention had opened the floodgates. People who had been afraid to speak for years were suddenly calling the FBI's tip line. One call was from a Hispanic man named Miguel Torres. His son had been pulled over by Donovan some time earlier for defective equipment. Donovan had claimed to smell marijuana and searched the car, finding nothing. But he did find $800 in cash in the glove compartment, money the boy had saved from his construction job to buy a birthday present for his mother. Donovan seized the cash under civil forfeiture laws, claiming it was suspected drug money. The Torres family filed a complaint, but Chief Harper had personally assured them it was a legitimate seizure and that if they pushed the matter, he would have to look into their immigration status. They had dropped it, terrified. Another call was from a young black woman who claimed Donovan had pulled her over late at night, making inappropriate comments and only letting her go after she gave him her phone number. He had harassed her with texts for weeks afterward. She had been too scared to report it. The stories poured in, each one a thread in a tapestry of abuse and corruption, with Mike Donovan and Ron Harper at its center. Denise had come to Maplewood to investigate a financial crime, but by becoming a victim herself, she had accidentally uncovered the human cost of the corruption, the deep, festering wound that the town had tried so desperately to hide. The karma was no longer just about one officer's bad day. It was becoming a reckoning for an entire town built on secrets and lies. The federal investigation into the Maplewood Police Department moved with the speed and force of a hurricane. Before long, the small-town police station was crawling with FBI agents and DOJ auditors. They weren't just looking for files related to Mike Donovan. They were looking for everything. Subpoenas were served not just to the police department, but to the town hall, the mayor's office, and the private towing company owned by the mayor's brother-in-law, a man named Hank Wilson. Mike Donovan, now stripped of his badge and authority, found himself utterly alone. The network that had protected him for years had vanished overnight. His phone calls to Chief Harper went straight to voicemail. His friends on the town council suddenly didn't know his name. The legal counsel provided by the police union was a junior lawyer who looked even more terrified than Donovan himself. He was brought in for his first interview with federal prosecutors. It wasn't the friendly chat he was used to with internal affairs. He was in a cold, sterile room facing a sharp-suited prosecutor from the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, a woman named Emily Rodriguez, who looked at him as if he were a specimen under glass. Agent Denise Carter sat in the corner, silent and observing, her presence a constant, unnerving reminder of his monumental error in judgment. "Mr. Donovan," Rodriguez began, her voice crisp and professional, "we're here to discuss the events of that day. But we're also here to discuss a number of other incidents. Let's start with the traffic stop of Mr. Torres's son sometime earlier. Can you explain the probable cause for seizing the $800 in cash from his vehicle?" Donovan blanched. I don't recall the specifics of that stop." Rodriguez slid a file across the table. "Perhaps this will refresh your memory. It's the seizure report you filed. And this," she slid another paper over, "is a sworn affidavit from Mr. Torres detailing how Chief Harper intimidated his family into dropping their complaint. That's witness tampering, Mr. Donovan, a federal offense." She continued relentlessly. One by one, she brought up the ghosts of his past, the young woman he harassed, an illegal search of a family's home based on a false tip, a pattern of disproportionate traffic stops targeting minority drivers backed up by the department's own data, which the FBI's analysts had already crunched. Each case was a brick, and Rodriguez was building a prison wall around him. The real bombshell came when they moved on to the department's finances. The auditors had found a slush fund, an unofficial account where a portion of the cash seized through civil forfeiture was being funneled. From that account, payments were made to Chief Harper, to Donovan himself, and to Mayor Richard Klein. "It seems, Mr. Donovan," Rodriguez said, her eyes boring into him, "that you weren't just a rogue cop with a temper problem. You were a bagman in a racketeering enterprise." Racketeering? RICO statutes. The words hung in the air, carrying the weight of decades-long prison sentences. Donovan's facade of defiance finally crumbled completely. He slumped in his chair, a defeated man. Meanwhile, the investigation was tearing through the town's power structure. The feds discovered that Hank Wilson's towing company was charging the town exorbitant fees for every vehicle impounded, with a significant percentage kicked back directly to Mayor Klein and Chief Harper. The traffic tickets Donovan wrote so aggressively weren't about public safety. They were about generating revenue for the scheme. Officer Harris, facing the prospect of being charged as a co-conspirator, broke down completely. He agreed to testify against Donovan and Harper in exchange for a plea deal. His testimony was devastating. He detailed conversations where Donovan would brag about shaking down drivers. He described how Chief Harper would personally shred complaints against Donovan, laughing as he did it, calling it taking out the trash. Harris became the key that unlocked the entire conspiracy from the inside. The dominoes fell one after another. First, Chief Harper was forced to resign. Soon after, he was indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of conspiracy, witness tampering, and money laundering. He was arrested at his home, the same home he'd boasted was paid for by wise investments. In a pre-dawn raid that was filmed by a local news crew, the image of the once mighty police chief being led away in handcuffs was a profound shock to the community. Next was Mayor Klein. Confronted with bank records and Harris's testimony, he also resigned, citing health reasons. His indictment followed shortly after. Hank Wilson's towing company was shut down, its assets frozen pending forfeiture to the federal government. The karma that hit Mike Donovan was the hardest of all. He wasn't just fired, he was publicly disgraced. The union that had once protected him now cast him out, unwilling to be associated with the federal firestorm he had ignited. His name became a local curse word. People who once greeted him with respect now crossed the street to avoid him. His wife, a prominent member of the local church, left him, unable to bear the shame. He lost his house, his pension, and his freedom. Facing an ironclad case and the testimony of his own partner, Donovan took a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of deprivation of rights under color of law, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit racketeering. Denise Carter attended his sentencing hearing. She sat in the back of the courtroom, not as a victim, but as an observer. She watched as Mike Donovan, dressed in an ill-fitting suit, stood before the judge. He tried to read a prepared statement of apology, but his voice broke and he sobbed, a pathetic imitation of the monster he had been. The judge was unmoved. "Mr. Donovan," he said, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom, "you took an oath to uphold the law. Instead, you used your badge as a weapon to abuse the very citizens you were sworn to protect. You were not a peacekeeper. You were a predator. And you were part of a system that allowed your predation to flourish. The damage you have done to the community's trust is immeasurable." The sentence was handed down, a long term in federal prison with no possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led a weeping Mike Donovan away, his eyes met Denise's for a fleeting moment. In them, she saw not remorse, but the stunned disbelief of a man who still couldn't comprehend how it had all gone so wrong. He hadn't just pulled over the wrong woman. He had pulled over a mirror, and it had forced him and his entire corrupt town to finally see the monsters they truly were. The downfall of Donovan, Harper, and the mayor sent shockwaves through Maplewood that reverberated for months. The town was forced into a painful period of self-reflection. The postcard-perfect image it had presented to the world had been torn away, revealing a deep-seated corruption that had poisoned it from the top down. For many residents, especially those who had lived in fear of the police department, it was a moment of catharsis and liberation. For others who had benefited from the old power structure, it was a bitter and unwelcome upheaval. The U.S. Department of Justice didn't just pack up and leave after the convictions. They imposed a federal consent decree on the Maplewood Police Department, a legally binding agreement that mandated sweeping reforms. Federal monitors were brought in to oversee the department's operations for years. New policies on use of force, traffic stops, and civil forfeiture were implemented. Every officer on the force had to undergo rigorous retraining in constitutional policing and implicit bias. A new police chief was appointed, a woman from outside the state with a reputation as a reformer. Her first act was to hold a series of town hall meetings, something Chief Harper had never done. In these meetings, long simmering grievances were finally aired. Miguel Torres stood up and, in a voice shaking with emotion, told the story of his son and the stolen birthday money. The young black woman Donovan had harassed shared her experience, giving voice to the fear that had kept her silent. The room was filled with dozens of similar stories, a testament to the reign of terror that had finally ended. Dr. Denise Carter stayed in the region for another few months, overseeing the final stages of her now vastly expanded investigation. Her role in the Maplewood takedown had become legendary within the Bureau. She had not only exposed a criminal enterprise, but had also provided a textbook case on how to dismantle a corrupt system by using its own arrogance against it. Before she left, she paid a visit to the Sweet Peach Pies bakery. The owner, Mrs. Betty Lawson, recognized her immediately. "You're the one," she said, her voice filled with a quiet awe. "You're the FBI agent." Denise smiled. "I'm just a woman who had a bad day at a traffic stop, ma'am." "No," Mrs. Lawson insisted, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're more than that. You gave people their voice back. For years, we all knew something was wrong, but we were too scared to say anything. We just lived with it. You didn't." She slid a freshly baked peach cobbler into a box. "This is on the house. A small thank you from the real Maplewood." Denise was touched by the gesture. It was a reminder that her work wasn't just about indictments and prison sentences. It was about restoring a community's hope. The karma for the other players in the saga continued to unfold. Officer Harris, having cooperated fully, received probation for his role. He left Maplewood immediately after his sentencing, unable to face the people he had failed to protect through his silence. He was a man marked for life by his cowardice, a stark example of how being a good guy requires more than just not being the bad guy. Chief Ron Harper, facing a lengthy prison term, saw his health deteriorate rapidly. His wife divorced him. His assets were seized, and he entered federal prison a broken and vilified man, a symbol of civic betrayal. Mayor Klein's fate was similar. His political legacy forever defined by greed and corruption. Mike Donovan's life in federal prison was a harsh and brutal education in powerlessness. He who had wielded absolute authority on the streets of Maplewood was now at the bottom of a rigid and violent hierarchy. He had no badge, no weapon, no power, only a number. The fear he had so casually instilled in others was now his constant companion. He wrote letters to his ex-wife and children that went unanswered. He filed appeals that were summarily dismissed. The system he had so arrogantly abused had now swallowed him whole, and there was no one left to hear his complaints. One day, Denise received a forwarded letter at the Columbia field office. It was from Donovan, sent from the federal penitentiary. It was a rambling, self-pitying tirade. He blamed her for ruining his life, for not understanding the pressures of his job, for being uppity and disrespectful. He called her a witch who had set a trap for him. Nowhere in the pages was there a single word of genuine remorse. Not for her, not for the Torres family, not for anyone he had victimized. He still didn't get it. He believed he was the victim. Denise read the letter, then calmly fed it into a shredder. His lack of repentance was the final damning confirmation of his character. Her job wasn't to change his heart. It was to ensure he could never again harm anyone with the power entrusted to him. And in that she had succeeded. The hard karma that had befallen him was not a matter of fate or revenge. It was a simple and direct consequence of his own actions. He had sown the wind, and he was now reaping the whirlwind, alone in a concrete cell. Time passed. The federal consent decree in Maplewood eventually ended, but its effects lingered. The police department was smaller, more professional, and more diverse. The relationship between the community and the police was not perfect, but it was built on a foundation of dialogue and accountability rather than fear. The story of the traffic stop became a local legend, a cautionary tale told to new police recruits about the dangers of arrogance and the importance of integrity. Dr. Denise Carter rose through the ranks of the FBI, eventually becoming the assistant director in charge of the entire criminal, cyber, response, and services branch. She became a driving force for reform within federal law enforcement, using the Maplewood case as a model for investigating systemic corruption in other jurisdictions. She never forgot the feeling of the hot metal roof under her hands, or the sneer on Mike Donovan's face. That memory wasn't a source of trauma, but a source of fuel. It was a constant reminder of the stakes, of the real-world impact of the abstract work she did behind a desk in Washington, D.C. One day, a junior agent came into her office with a preliminary report on a new case. It involved a sheriff's department in rural Texas with a suspicious pattern of civil forfeiture and a high number of dismissed civilian complaints. "The statistical patterns are troubling, ma'am," the young agent said, "but we don't have a smoking gun yet. No first-hand accounts." Denise looked at the file, at the cold data on the page. She knew that behind those numbers were real people. People like Miguel Torres, people whose fear kept them silent. A system like that feels invincible from the outside. People in charge, they believe their own hype. Denise told the agent, her voice quiet but firm. They think the rules don't apply to them. They get sloppy. Arrogant. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes distant for a moment as she remembered a dusty Toyota Camry and a condescending voice asking if she was a doctor of basket weaving. "Keep digging," she said, her focus returning with sharp intensity. People like that, they always make a mistake. They always underestimate someone. All we have to do is be there when it happens. The case of Mike Donovan had taught her a valuable lesson that she now passed on to every agent under her command. The most powerful weapon against systemic corruption isn't a battering ram. It's a tripwire. You let the target's own arrogance and prejudice lead them straight into it. As for Mike Donovan, he was released from prison after serving his sentence. He was a stooped, graying man in his 50s, his health broken, his spirit seemingly crushed. He returned to South Carolina, but could not live in Maplewood. He was a pariah. He took a job as a night shift janitor in a warehouse an hour's drive away, living in a cheap motel room. One evening, while mopping a floor under the harsh fluorescent lights, he saw a news report on the small television in the break room. It was an interview with FBI Assistant Director Denise Carter, discussing a new national initiative to promote accountability in law enforcement. He saw her face, older, more powerful, but with the same intelligent, unyielding eyes that had stared back at him from his own car's reflection all those years ago. He froze, leaning on his mop. He watched as she spoke eloquently about justice, honor, and the sacred trust between police and the public. She was a national figure, a force for change. He was a ghost, invisible, mopping floors in the dead of night. In that moment, the full crushing weight of his karma landed on him. It wasn't just the prison, the lost job, or the broken family. It was the absolute, undeniable finality of it all. He had tried to make her feel small, to put her in her place. Instead, he had only succeeded in destroying his own, while she had gone on to change the world. He had been a footnote in her story, while she had become the author of his downfall. He turned off the television and went back to his work, the silence of the empty warehouse his only companion. It was the most fitting sentence of all. The story of Dr. Denise Carter and Officer Mike Donovan is a stark reminder that true power isn't found in a badge or a uniform, but in integrity and the courage to uphold the law, no matter who is breaking it. It shows how one person's arrogance can unravel an entire system of corruption, and how karma, when it finally arrives, can be as swift and decisive as a federal task force. In the end, the story of Dr. Denise Carter and Officer Mike Donovan leaves us with one powerful, unforgettable life lesson. Never underestimate the quiet strength of someone who refuses to be broken. True power doesn't live in a badge, a uniform, or the illusion of small-town authority. It lives in integrity, in patience, and in the courage to stand tall, even when the world tries to push you down. Mike Donovan thought he could humiliate and control a woman simply because of who she was and where she came from. What he didn't realize was that he had just stepped into the path of someone whose entire life was dedicated to exposing the very darkness he represented. In a single afternoon, his arrogance didn't just cost him his job or his freedom. It cost him everything he had built on lies and fear. And in that moment of reckoning, the whole town was forced to confront a painful truth. The systems we allow to thrive in silence will eventually collapse under the weight of their own corruption. This story reminds us that justice may be delayed, but when it comes with clarity and force. It teaches us to carry ourselves with dignity, no matter the circumstances, because you never know whose life you might be changing, or whose downfall you might be triggering, simply by refusing to bow. If this powerful tale of accountability and quiet courage moved you, touched your heart, or reminded you of your own strength, drop a comment below and tell me, what's one time in your life when standing your ground changed everything? Which part of Denise's story hit you the hardest? And if you believe no one is above the law and love stories that deliver real justice and hard-earned karma, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel while turning on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss another story that reminds us why doing the right thing still matters. Thank you for watching. Your support truly means the world.